Welcome. You should continue eating your delicious lunch. I am Liz McGill. I'm the Dean of the Stanford Law School, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this conversation. This is the first public event of a day of events that are to honor our Bright Award winner in environmental sustainability, Art Sterritt, and we're just delighted he's here with us today. As you know, this luncheon conversation is going to be an informal one, but it is led by Felicity Barringer of the New York Times, and we are delighted to have her with us today. She is now, as you know, and I'm sure you've read many stories she's written, and a very distinguished environmental reporter at the Times, but we at Stanford like to remind everyone that she got her start at Stanford University as the editor-in-chief of the Stanford Daily. Felicity, in 1986, joined the Times as a correspondent in Moscow, and there she covered the Chernobyl disaster, among other things. Between her Moscow years and her current beat, she's edited or written for the Foreign, National, and Business Review sections. She's been on the environment at the Times since about 2003, exploring all the issues of our day in that area, the consequences of coal-fired power plants, Western water shortages, in an era of expanding droughts, and California's work on climate change, among many others. At a time when media organizations are cutting their coverage and their reporting to the bone, Felicity is a great reminder of what it takes to be a great journalist and to really ask the questions and do the research that's necessary to cover the national news. So we are incredibly thankful that she's with us today. I'm going to clap. Art Sterritt, as you know, is the Executive Director of Coastal First Nations, and I hope I'm not spoiling anything by saying that later today, he will receive Stanford's Bright Award for Environmental Sustainability. I'm going to say more about Art later today for those of you who can join us again here for our ceremony that starts at 5 o'clock. But Art has done remarkable work in helping to preserve the Great Bear Rainforest in northern British Columbia, which is one of the great environmental achievements in North America in recent memory. In 2000, he founded Coastal First Nations, which is the first ever alliance of Indigenous people in British Columbia. He began working closely with environmental groups such as Greenpeace and the Sierra Club and many others, private corporations, local, provincial, and the federal governments. The result was a stunning achievement. 21 million acres of the Great Bear Rainforest, then threatened by development. They were placed under a sustainable form of ecosystem-based management by Coastal First Nations member tribes. While protecting the ecosystem, Art and the Coastal First Nations have established services that support its members' nations' efforts to create a sustainable business within that territory. It's a truly remarkable achievement, and Art has done many other things and will do many other things in the future, as you will hear about this afternoon. But we are going to start off this conversation with a question and answer between Felicity and Art, and then open it up to the group for some questions. So as they are talking, and you have questions about how Art has done what he's been able to do and what he is planning to do in the future and how it's possible to achieve what he's achieved, please be thinking of your questions because you'll be called on. So thank you for joining us.
That's the other left.
The other right?
Well, thank you all very much for coming out here. I want to make sure you can hear me, but I'm pretty sure this is on. I thank Liz very much for that introduction. Yes, I did get my start at Stanford. But along the way, I've learned that one of the great joys of journalism is finding out really important stuff that you didn't know about before. And when Liz was kind enough to ask me to do this, I won't say I didn't know about Great Bear, but let's just say I didn't know enough. And it's been marvelous, fascinating, and it's produced a bunch of questions, researching who you are and what you've done, and how basically against the waves of history, how you have essentially changed the wave of economic and cultural history in North America. That's an incredible achievement,
Yeah.
and there are lots of ways to break it down, and we could talk for hours. I could let Art talk for hours, but we obviously have a limited amount of time. You have other engagements, and you have your own questions you want to ask.
Right.
So let me start. I did enough research to force myself to write down my questions because I couldn't memorize them all. So forgive me for a little bit of reading here, but I'm hoping some of these questions give you the information that you need to sort of put everything that Art has done in perspective, Art and the Coastal First Nations in perspective.
Well, you gather your thoughts around that, Felicity. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to thank Stanford for this. I just want to say we had an amazing event a little while ago here, and wandering around Stanford, we found a part of the Great Bear Rainforest. There is a tree that came from the Great Bear Rainforest. It's a totem pole that's just over here. It was carved by one of the members of the communities that I work for, and we just had one of our leaders over there and sang a song and kind of re-anointed the pole. So we have a connection, and I think perhaps that's why we're here. We do have that connection with Stanford, so I want to thank everybody for that. And I think you've probably got your thoughts together now.
I've got my thoughts together. I've got a pronunciation issue, but you'll help me with that. You're the son of a hereditary chief of the Gitxsan?
Gitxsan.
Gitxsan,
Yeah,
thank
right.
you. First Nation, and you married the daughter of Tsimshian First Nation, hereditary chief.
Yeah.
Your family was in the logging business for 2 generations before you and your brother came along. And you worked a little bit as a logger when your dad was telling you what to do.
Yeah.
And after that as a fisherman and an artist who helps, and you've helped preserve your culture. You learned about helping preserve your culture in your youth. Could you talk about the difference between Canada and the United States in terms of the political weight of First Nations, Aboriginal cultures, and how did the Western migration of Europeans and their interaction with the Aboriginal peoples differ in one country versus another?
Yeah. Throughout the Americas, there were certain laws around settlement. In South America, Central America, United States, as settlers moved into areas, there had been a royal proclamation in 1763 that said you had to come to agreement with First Nations. You couldn't just move in and take their land. You had to do treaties with them. And so that happened. So you see that all across the U.S., despite the fact that there's treaties everywhere. They've all been broken, by the way, but they did what they were supposed to do. They did that all across Canada as well until they got to British Columbia. And they just decided, well, nah. There was a colony there called British Columbia, and they thought, well, we did a couple little treaties in Vancouver Island, but the rest of these First Nations throughout the rest of the province, we don't think that we have any need to do treaties with them, so they didn't do it. So bad mistake, because we repatriated our Constitution from Britain after being a colony. Our Constitution was in London. When it was repatriated, my brother and other First Nation leaders made sure that listed in that Constitution was Aboriginal title. And that title is real. And so over a number of decades now, provincial and federal governments have kind of ignored the fact that we have this title in British Columbia. So as settlers came into the region, they ignored it as well. And but in recent times, as the corporations have moved in and began to affect the way our lives are, when settlers first arrived in our area, we were the economy, literally. I mean, we come from an area where there's tremendous riches. We have a tremendous language. We have governing structures. We have an art form that's second to none in the world. I mean, the totem pole that you see out there is a result of that. And that's based on riches. That's where art comes from, right? And so we had that. And so as Europeans arrived in our area, basically we became the industry. So we were the loggers. I grew up as a logger. My father was a logger. He had his own sustainable logging operation. And I went to the coast, and my wife's father had a sustainable fishing operation. But over time, the corporations came in and saw, this looks pretty good. There's riches being generated in these regions. And they said, well, let's see what we can do to change that. So they began to corporatize it. They would go to governments and get laws passed. For example, they would get tree farm licenses that covered vast, vast, vast areas. So they got rid of all the little licenses that our people held and began to clear cut the area. And so that's where we ended up in a situation here in the 90s where we began to be pushed out of the economy completely by corporations. Where they're expecting us just to be worker bees, right, instead of actually owning the things that we actually had a right to. So we took our rights, our title, and we said, you're not going to treat us like this. We're not an impoverished group of people. We own this land, and you are not going to do this anymore. And so we began to do court cases. And since about 1970, we've won over 200 court cases. 200 court cases, the biggest swath of legal victories in the history of Canada, where we have won the right to title, we've won the right to an economy, we've won the right to fish and to hunt, and you name it, we've won it.
Speak a little bit about the decision by your Supreme Court just a month and a half ago, which kind of solidified everything you're talking about.
So the culmination of that was a month and a half ago, where we've got all kinds of industry being proposed for British Columbia. In the midst of that, one small First Nation decides, British Columbia, you can't log my area anymore. You can't put tailings ponds in there for mines. You can't wreck lakes. You can't do this stuff anymore. And they went to court, and they went to the BC court, and then the BC Supreme Court, and then they went to the Supreme Court of Canada. And because we'd won all these court cases, Canada kept telling, or the court kept telling Canada and British Columbia, negotiate with these people, they have rights. Negotiate. They wouldn't negotiate. Well, they said, okay, enough of this. We're going to settle this once and for all. So they assigned the land to that First Nation. They said, it's yours. It's your title, Aboriginal title, and BC, they're going to decide what happens there. That just absolutely shook the foundation of the economy in British Columbia. So now you've got a prime minister knows that they can't do whatever they want in our region. You've got a premier knows it. So now they start to gather the First Nations up to try and come up with a plan for how we can move forward together.
And if I could just take you further on that, now that First Nations have this power, and particularly the coastal First Nations in British Columbia, you've used it already in the Great Bear, and you are continuing to use it to change how much logging is done, what type of logging is done, and who profits from the logging that's done. Talk about your negotiating stance and how you've been able to, what your goal is and whether you've achieved it on those points.
Right. You know, the irony is this nation that won this court case, I mean, they have the most sacred thing that any of us could ever imagine as First Nations. They've won the Holy Grail. What did they do? They immediately called up the Haida, which is a member of us, and said, we just won this court case and we want to come over and see how we can implement it. And we know that you've already done that. As part of Coastal First Nations, we have done what they've been dreaming of. We did it a different way. We came together as First Nations like we never had before, as you heard Dean McGill say. We didn't just look at ourselves and think, that's all the power we need. We actually brought in all of the environmental groups and said, look, if you want to do stuff in our region, you're going to have to do that through us. They agreed. We then went to the logging companies and industry and said, look, if you're going to operate here, you're going to have to be in our room. At the end of the day, as you heard earlier, we brought everybody into the room. We then went to the government and said, we're going to do a plan. We're going to plan what happens in this region. It's going to be sustainable based on certain sustainable principles. And we have been doing that now for the last 15 years. And so we've gotten to the point where we have some of the first ever government-to-government agreement with First Nations and a government in Canada was ours. We did the first forest and range agreements where revenue that comes out of the forest came to us. We did the first carbon offset agreement. We have 1 million tons of carbon offsets that are for sale out of our region. The natural capital of the region is actually paying our people to manage the forest now. So those are all the things, or some of them, that we have done. So we think that what we have and what government is saying is, maybe what we should be doing is what we, with all the rest of the First Nations, is what we did with coastal First Nations, because they seem to be, almost all the way there. All these other people don't know where to start. We've got chaos in British Columbia. So they're beginning to say, well, let's see what we can do to do different processes. We're not just going to negotiate. Maybe we can put together some of these examples and people can just adopt different ways of doing things. So.
If I could ask you to get down and dirty a little bit about the monetizing of natural capital. Mm-hmm. I say natural mm-hmm. capital, that's a word that also has deep roots here at Stanford.
Absolutely.
Because of Gretchen Daly,
right.
One of our professors whose career has been devoted to developing the idea and the practical benefit of natural right. capital. Right. You turn that into an economic resource right. for the First Nations, the coastal First Nations. How do you do that? Who buys the carbon credits? How do you get the carbon credits? Can you do just a little sure. bit of a primer sure. on monetizing natural capital? In order to create carbon offsets, you have to do something that you had not previously done. You have to make sure that you make decisions that set aside forests and riparian areas and things that you wouldn't normally have done. So you have to conscientiously create a credit. Forests sequester carbon dioxide. So they take it in, they spit the oxygen back out, but they keep the carbon there. Carbon is what does the, that's our greenhouse gases. Climate change, a little bit warmer in Palo Alto than normal kind of thing. And so we did that. As we did our land use plan, we conscientiously made sure that we protected areas and we were doing it in a way that we knew we could get some monetary value out of it. If you don't do that, you're kind of fooling people into doing that. So we did that, and but it was kind of a natural thing, and it was kind of odd going into our communities, because here we are, we're going into our communities saying, look, if you protect a riparian area, an area along a river, instead of 100 feet, we do 200 feet, we actually get a return on that. We get there can be some money come back out of that to help you manage the area, and they're saying, well, how does that work? What is this? What is this thing that we can't see? But in their own mind, they already knew that if you look after your area, if you look after your place, look after your rivers, you look after your air and your land, it'll give back to you. So it was a concept that they understood, but they didn't quite understand it in this new context. So we started to tell them, if we do this, somebody's going to pay us for the capital that we create in there. They didn't get it, and until we actually started to return some financial gain to them, and they use that to manage the area. So the area is being protected by itself. The money that comes out of it goes to the people that manage it to make sure that it stays the way it is and for all time. And so, that's a natural way. We as people depend on forests. The forests depend on us. Now we depend on the forest again. We're kind of changing the paradigm back to the way it had been for millennia. Well, then just to follow up, and you've already partly answered this question, but you have the money coming in from right. essentially from carbon offsets, and some of it is being used to manage the forest. You also have a good amount of money coming in from philanthropic donations. Overall, what is your goal what is your budget now that you have these opportunities, and what is your goal? How do you want to use that budget?
Well, when we first came together 15 years ago, we had two principles that we were operating under, and basically said that we want to be self-sufficient, self-governing within our traditional territories. And certainly, you can pretend you're governing an area, but if you have to go to government or somebody else for money, or even to a philanthropic organization for resourcing to manage the area, to do the things you need to do, you really are not governing. Somebody else is kind of pulling your strings. So what we really needed in order to bring everything over the top was economic sovereignty. And economic sovereignty allows you to be sovereign as nations, and we consider ourselves to be nations. And so that's what that's done. And so when you look at carbon offsets, that's what we've done. Carbon offsets in British Columbia right now, we have a legislated imperative. Our government has said we have to be carbon neutral, and they buy carbon offsets off of us now. 12, 15, maybe in time it'll get up to be like $25 a ton. Right now we're getting $12 or $15 a ton. And we have 875,000 tons available every year. That money goes back into our communities to manage the forests. So that's the down and dirty. We also have other people that we had the Macquarie Bank out of Australia come to us when they first heard about us creating all these carbon offsets, because it's one of the biggest offset projects in the world. He said, we'll buy all of your offsets. We said, what are you going to do with it? Oh, he said, the oil companies will pay big money for it. And we said, get lost. Our people have set a number of principles, and they've said, we will offset when people are trying to do things properly, doing it as best they can. But if somebody wants to come in here to duck doing the proper thing, they're not getting any offsets off of us. We have a principle.
So you'd get more money for them.
We get way more money. Probably get $40 a ton for it if you sold it to the oil companies. Right now, we're the ones blocking the oil companies. I mean, we could sell them our offsets for anything we wanted right now if we let them go through our territory. I mean, they'd give us anything we wanted. But that's not the game that we play. We still need to preserve our territory. So.
And speaking of oil, it is very much on the minds of virtually every environmentalist in the United States, and I would guess most of the people in this room, the notion of getting oil to market, how you do that, and particularly if it's oil from Canadian oil sands, which is thick,
we don't call them oil sands, they're tar sands.
Okay.
Prime Minister of Canada would like us to call them oil sands, but it's not really oil, it's tar.
Okay, point taken, yeah. Tar sands. Yeah. So your fight, you have a pipeline proposed that would go through First Nations territory and come out at a port on the Pacific at the edge of British Columbia. And the port, I think, is called Kitimat.
Kitimat, that's
Kitimat, right.
That means people of the snow.
Oh, thank you. So it was going to be the port from which tar sands oil was going to be exported to Asia. And a lot of people in corporate Canada were going to make an awful lot of money because Asia is very thirsty for this oil.
Right.
Whether or not it's actually blocked, certainly there have been events in the last 2-3 weeks that have indicated that your opposition to this pipeline has probably and maybe actually stopped it, and it may be stopped for good. This is going to be terribly relevant to everybody here because this is analogous to the Keystone XL pipeline. How did you do it? Is Northern Gateway actually dead? And how did you do it? And what was most important in your fight? Basically, you're having title to your land. Jim Prentice's signal that Alberta, this is the Premier of Alberta, that he is not, that he doesn't accept the idea, if coastal First Nations don't accept the idea of having this pipeline. How did you?
Well, when we've described everything that we've done. So we're busy doing ecosystem-based management. We're trying to create a sustainable economy. We're doing shellfish aquaculture. We're doing sustainable logging and ecotourism, and we really are building up our economy slowly but steady, sustainable things. In the middle of all that, and after about $400 million in investment, and it's what we've been able to bring in, about 120 million of 60 million out of philanthropic organizations, mostly in the U.S., 60 million out of Canadian government institutions. And on top of all that, we're ready to launch this economy, and in comes this pipeline, and they're coming right into the heart of everything that we're doing. And so they come in, and we're a pragmatic bunch. We take a look at it and say, okay, well, we'll study it. We'll see whether or not we agree with it. So the first thing we do is we go to Valdez, Alaska. We find out that after 20 years, at that time it's 25, 26 years now, the shellfish have not come back. The herring stocks have not come back. There's still oil on the beaches. They actually cleaned up 15%. We're saying, whoa, this is not a pretty picture. We don't really need this. And then in the middle of all of our deliberations, we get a spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So I and my colleagues went down there and checked out what was going on. And we went out into Barataria Bay. It was almost flat calm. There's just this little little ripple on the water, and there's billions and billions of dollars worth of vessels sitting out there doing nothing. And I'm asking this friend of mine who's the president of the Louisiana Shrimp Association, I said, why are those boats not out cleaning up oil? And they said, it's too rough. I said, what are you talking about? This is not rough. Where I come from, this is a calm day. And he says, well, he said, if more than a 1 foot chop, they can't clean up oil. And he said, and they're not really trying to. He said, what you'll notice is, you can't see oil right now, but what they're doing is they'll send boats out to survey where their oil is, and then at night they bomb it. They bring in dispersant, and they just literally, they had 21 planes bombing the Gulf of Mexico, and when you go out there during the day, you wouldn't see any oil. And they cleaned up 3% of the Gulf of Mexico. So that was kind of the end of it. We come back to British Columbia with a number of lessons. One was that you can't clean up oil. But there was a really, really important lesson that we learned that I think can work for people on Keystone or Line 9 East or whatever else. We were told by the Cajuns, who were actually Acadians originally from Canada, and the Homa First Nation down there, that if you ever allow oil into your area, they will take your culture and change it forever. You will not have the culture you used to have. You will become a dependent society, and they will basically call the shots on you. So don't let them in. Get home. Despite the fact that you as First Nations have rights and you have title, you better get the rest of British Columbia on your side. And so my friends and I came back and we put together a plan to inform British Columbians. And we did that. We shared with them about the lack of technology. We shared with them about the impacts of spraying Corexit, how toxic it was and how it was killing shrimp beds and everything in Louisiana. We shared that with them, and lo and behold, British Columbians, we declared a tanker ban in our region, and 80% of British Columbians in every poll for the last 6 years support our tanker ban. That's political power on top of legal power. And so when we first started this exercise, the Prime Minister of Canada said there's going to be a pipeline going to the coast of British Columbia, and it's going into Kitimat, and the Minister of Environment said it's going through whether you like it or not. We're not going to be stopped by some little radicals in British Columbia. If we need to, we'll bring out the army to roll right over them. That's what they were saying. You should see the looks on their faces right now. They really have, they realize that all of these threats, I think we went from about 65 to 70% support in British Columbia and went up to 80 and 85%. Immediately, everybody rallied around us to protect our place. And Canada has been pushed back so far now. They've got an election coming up. We had an announcement by a new premier in Alberta, Jim Prentice. He announced last week, he said, I guess there won't be a pipeline going into Kitimat. Coastal First Nations or have too many concerns about it. But that's not the end of it. I mean, oil is like water. They're trying to get to the coast, and if somebody blocks them here, they're going to go over here. And the point I'm making to you, and I think that Felicity's looking for, is that you have to personalize things. You have to get people in the regions to make sure that they understand. You have to respect people. And a lot of people give you a lot of flack, and they expect you to honor the things they've done. We didn't take anybody for granted. We shared good information, and they made the decisions, not us. And that's the way I think that everybody should be doing things in the future. If you want to stop Line 9, you want to stop Keystone, those people in there should know the implications of that, and they'll make the right decision. So.
And then, again, you've anticipated where I was going, but for everybody here who has an interest in these issues and has an interest in working on them, there are going to be many occasions when they deal with Aboriginal groups, whether they're First Nations in Canada, whether they're Native American tribes, whether they're Aboriginal groups elsewhere in the world. What are the key things to know? Because you've put together a coalition, the Coastal First Nations. How is that different from putting together a coalition from the world we would, right, as we would understand it? And what are the sensitivities that are most easily trampled on by people who don't know what they're doing?
So I think there's a couple of questions there, but the first one is, what's different about First Nations? we talked a little bit about natural capital and our relationship with our place, and if you're proposing a project and it's going to have a negative impact on the environment, you might as well just go away, because First Nations are not for sale. They're not just going to take an economic project and do away with their traditional activities, their culture, their society, their traditional economy. They're not going to do away with that. If you do think that you have a project that has a likelihood of succeeding because it can be done in an environmentally friendly way, go and talk to the First Nation about it first. Don't come up with an idea and then show up and say, we want to do this, or this is the way we're going to put in a pipeline, or we're going to put in a tailings pond for a mine or something. Go and talk to the First Nation. Tell them you've got an idea and you want to discuss an idea with them, but do it early. Don't show up with any preconceived notions about what it's going to be. If you do, you're in big trouble, because they can smell you coming a mile away. So I think that's the two answers. When you're dealing with First Nations, get in the room really early. Find out, build a relationship with them, and you'll find out that they'll come up with solutions for you as well. We're doing that, for example, with the natural gas industry in British Columbia. We had one company, for example, Shell, came into our region, wants to put a natural gas plant in Kitimat. And they showed up, signed an agreement with somebody, and they agreed to use the worst technology in the world, dirtiest. Meanwhile, our premier is saying, we're going to be the cleanest in the world. We're going to be cleaner in the US, cleaner in Australia, cleaner than everybody. Shell thought, we got an agreement, we're doing it. We said, like heck. We started going after them. We did airshed studies, and we said, okay, now we're going to start sharing this with the public. They said, hold on a sec here, hold on a sec. We're going to review our technology. We met with Shell last week, and they said, we think that we can come in and actually meet the benchmark for technology that British Columbia is setting. We can actually be below that. So we don't have to buy carbon offsets. We don't need to pay a carbon tax. We think we're going to have the actual best technology in the world. And we pushed them to that. I mean, we did away with the carbon offset sale, but so what? We're not just trying to sell offsets. We're actually trying to sell clean capitalism. And if they can be clean as they can possibly be, then we'll work with them. And that's the kind of stuff that we're doing.
So just to reiterate,
that was a solution of having a relationship with us.
The mistake,
we helped them.
If there is a lesson, and you've pretty well already said it, the lesson is to come in thinking you know better than the First Nations, and have to be corrected on that point, which is already putting you crosswise with each other.
That's right. One thing they don't understand about us, and the thing that sets us apart from a lot of different groups, is the leadership that I work for gives us a mandate to go out and get the best people in the world to work for us. So we don't just know what we're talking about. We have the best. So the technology ideas, we know what the best technology is. If somebody shows up and says, this is it, we say, bull. This is the way it's going to have to be done. And so we generally outgun them with knowledge, and we'll go out and hire people from around the world to bring that knowledge to us. And it works. Our people have been snowed for years by people coming in and claiming to know what's best for them.
So I think the moment has come when I should turn it over to all of you, and I have a few more questions, but I think this should be your shot. So anybody who wants to stand up and ask a question, please do so. And maybe while we're waiting, I'll ask one more, and which is, where else in North America can your work be replicated?
Well, our rights and our title are unique to our area. It was a big mistake made by Canada that they never settled. But the work that we've done in our relationship building can be replicated anywhere. So bringing First Nations together, and environmental community, and business community, and mayors, and unions, and everything, that can be done anywhere. It takes a lot of work. We had thousands of meetings to make this work. But when everybody's game, and you have a principled negotiation, so we develop principles of sustainability and things. And most corporations will say, well, we're sustainable, we want to be sustainable, we have a responsibility to be sustainable. But the reality is they've got a quarter that they've got to make sure they get some bucks out on, right? And they got another quarter after that, and they may look a year out. They probably have a 5-year plan, but they really don't even know what it looks like in 5 years. They got to make money now. When we come in the room, we're saying a sustainability plan is forever. It's not just a 5-year plan. It's not just a 10-year plan. We are designing something that has to last forever. The difference in it is we're the locals. We've been there for 10,000 years, and we're going to be there in 10,000 years from now. That corporation has no vested interest in that area. They're going to take their money and they're going to invest it in monuments to themselves in New York City, big tall ones with shiny, you know, they do it in Toronto and different places. You'll see parks in different places that are named after these industrialists. They take their money and put it somewhere else. We stay there. And so they have to recognize that they're going to have to come up with a real sustainability plan. The funny thing was, they say, well, goodness, you know, we can't do that. And we say, hold on a sec. You agreed to these principles of sustainability. Once you agree, you're in the room, because they can't disagree that it's a sustainable plan. So.
Yes.
You said something that I thought was at the beginning that I really, it struck me deep for, that you were not an impoverished people.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about the environment, of course, I'm moved very much, but can you talk a little bit about what this means for your people going forward, and the kids and the generations that will follow you and look back at the Bright Award with pride?
Right. Yeah, I think one of the, you know, if there's anything that I would be, you know, I could hang my hat on, is I think that what we've designed is going to be there forever. And I mean, usually nothing is ever forever, but what we've done is we've created an economy that people depend on. It's not as good as we hope it to be, but it depends on that area. And so the people who live there have gone back to depending on it. We haven't allowed an oil company to come in and we become dependent on that, or an LNG company, so we become dependent on that. Even with the LNG companies, we're pushing them to use renewable energy to liquefy gas. So we'll have legacy power that's friendly to our environment. And so the comment about us being an impoverished people, whenever you look at First Nations people, you always have these stereotypes of First Nations people who have nothing and have never had a job or whatever. And where I come from, I grew up in what I consider to be one of the most wealthy places on this planet. Not only did we have this old economy, our access to all the food and plants and medicines and everything that come from our place, that was the foundation of our art and our culture and everything. It was all still there. And then along came a logging, and we kind of took over that industry, and so we became extra rich. You know, we didn't actually need to go to the store to buy anything, but we had money because we were running the industry. And when I went to the coast of British Columbia, it was the same thing. There were riches on the coast of BC were unbelievable. I mean, First Nations people, millionaire people, all over the place, literally. I mean, without exaggeration, we know all of them. Some of them are family, but these are just hard-working people. They had their core, they had that foundation, and to that they added a new economy. Well, when the corporations came along and kind of pulled us out of that, took over that part of the economy, we didn't end up back on the land being poor. We just ended up being back on the land being as rich as we used to be, just not this extraordinarily rich group. Now, we want to be part of a more modern economy. We're moving forward. We've got internet and everything else like everybody else. Although, when I first met my wife, we had no phones in the community, things like that. That's a while ago. We won't tell how long that was. But you know, we have, Pat and I have 16 grandchildren. We want to make sure that they have all the choices that everybody else has. But we also want them to be able to look behind them and say, this is where we came from, and we can always go back there. That's our social safety net. It's not some welfare check from some government agent. Our social safety net is our forest, our water, and our air.
Yes. Sorry, right here.
Hi, Mr. Sterritt. So I'm Stacy Jessman Denaltoy. I'm a lecturer in the Native American Studies Department at Stanford. I'm also from British Columbia. And I guess some of the concerns that some British Columbians and Canadians have are that we all know that Enbridge has bought a piece of land above Prince Rupert and might have plans to move the pipeline from its path into Kitimat up to that that piece. And as we hear in the news, Enbridge is always advertising that it has convinced, the percentages vary, but 80% of First Nations along the route that this is a good model, and they've caved, and we hear all sorts of things. But I'm just wondering what sort of conversations you might be having with the First Nations on the path of an alternate route, or about alternative economic models to agreeing to enter into agreements with Enbridge.
Yeah, you've really brought up something very, very important. Because we've been so successful as coastal First Nations, we've kind of blocked this, and like I said, oil flows like water. We blocked them in Kitimat. We're confident of that. They're going to come out somewhere else, and that place appears to, we even heard Jim Prentice say we're heading for Prince Rupert. We think that's a good idea. Well, coastal First Nations territory extends into Prince Rupert, and our people haven't changed their mind about that one bit. As a matter of fact, the local First Nation, Lochwilliams, that lives right there, it's all my wife's family and all the chiefs and everybody, and they're not going to agree to it either. So they've still got a tough road in front of them. But having said that, you talk about what's the alternative for people in that region. Well, oil really isn't an alternative. There's nothing there. There's no jobs. A pipeline provides about 150 jobs between the coast of British Columbia and Alberta. I mean, they'll lie to you and tell you there might be 500 across Canada or something, but the reality is we have a region that has 30,000 jobs and about $3 billion in revenue. Why would we jeopardize that for these few little jobs that somebody from some other country is going to get? So you ask about them going in a different route. So Prentice already said they're going to try and move there. And they're going into every single one of our communities, and they're trying to up the ante. They're trying to get there before I get there, or someone like me is created in those regions to let people know that they're lying. Because we had a community meeting in one of the communities that my brother and I come from. This group that Prentice is boasting about, they had said that they were going to get 250 First Nations chiefs out to a meeting. And I just talked about a nephew of mine about this, and he said he got the word out that what was going on was an end run on the Enbridge project, and I think they got about 20 people out to the meeting or something. So they're not having the success that they want, but they have a First Nations people leading it. And so that First Nations person is going in and telling people, this is a good project. We respect the environment. We're going to protect the coast. And they're kind of believing a little bit. So I had a meeting when I first got to San Francisco. I flew in and I immediately went over and I had dinner over at Fort Mason. I met with a funder. The reason I met with the funder is because we need to come up with an information plan for those people along that new route. So we've educated everybody where we are, but we need to educate those other people so that they can make good decisions. We know they will. We have no doubt about it. But they have to understand that this is not an economic model that's going to do anybody any good. But there's sure a lot of stuff being spread around on it right now. And so I guess the lesson in it all is that, oil's not going to quit. And we're talking about the biggest industry that ever hit planet Earth. So they're not going away anytime soon. But we have some tools that we can use to hold them at bay, and we just need to share those sooner than later.
Yes, here.
Calvin Sandmore, University of Victoria Environmental Law Clinic. Calvin Sandmore and University of Victoria Environmental Law Clinic. Art, I think one of the most remarkable things that coastal First Nations have done is to develop special rules for resources on the coast. So the rules for forestry are much tighter than they are in the rest of British Columbia. And you're developing marine use plans to develop special rules for marine use.
Yep.
And this is now being emulated by interior nations that are looking at a special code of rules for mining that is particularly apt since we've had the hugest mining disaster last month. But I wonder if you could just tell people about how it was that coastal First Nations were able to negotiate special, more stringent forestry rules and marine use plans, and maybe a little bit about how the Coastal Guardian Network enforces rules.
Thank you, Calvin. And for you, those of you that don't know, Calvin actually nominated me for this award, so I mean, he just about blew me away, to be honest. When he nominated me, it was incredibly flattering. And then I got a call from Dean McGill, or an email about a week and a half later. I just about fell out of my chair. I thought, are you guys kidding? You must be crazy. But anyway, thanks to all of you. Coastal First Nations, in negotiating more stringent rules around how you log and what you do within a particular region, whether it's in the fishery or in the forest, was based on principled negotiations. It's that you set that foundation so everybody agrees to the same principles. And so then when you get into the room, you make sure that you're working from a common page book. One of the things that we did that had never been done before in any negotiation is we worked from the same bit of information. We ended up in a situation where when we first came together, we had logging companies. They had their knowledge about the forest. We had environmental groups, about 6 of them, and they had 6 different pieces of information or knowledge about the forest. And then we had the government had their information, and we had our information. And when we first got together, we argued about who was smarter. And, well, we knew we were smarter, so we proposed that we put together what was called the Coast Information Team. We all took our knowledge and we put it in this box. And we put some scientists in there to analyze it and give us the information that was the right information. And we all worked from the same page. So we didn't have this give and take of a logging company saying, oh, I'm smarter, I can log more, and environmentalists saying you can't log anything. We worked from a common playbook. And that was something that had never been done before. And you'll find, I don't know when in other areas where they do that, but that sure was a game changer for us. So then you take the principles that we had and you apply those in that room. So you have these scientists who are helping develop the principles for ecosystem-based management. And they come out of everybody's database. And nobody can argue that the results that you're getting don't meet the criteria that they've put into the room, because that is their information. And that allows you to end up at the end of the day, those who don't quite agree with the result can't disagree with the process, because they were all part of it. And so there's some give and take. So as a result of that, with groups like the Haida, for example, they took their annual allowable cut from about 2.1 million cubic meters of timber annually down to 0.9. So less than half of the logging is happening in the area as than used to happen before. They've protected 50% of the whole Haida Gwaii, the whole of their islands is in complete protection. It's not to be no industrial logging. So, Kelvin, I don't know if that answers all of what you're asking.
That's a lot of it. And what about the Guardian Watch?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So one of the things we've run into, there's always been protection going on the coast, and you'll get an environmental group come in and, oh, let's protect this valley, it's important, we got grizzly bears there or something. And the provincial government will eventually agree, and First Nation will agree, and then you protect it and everybody goes away and there's nothing left, there's nobody managing the area. So people keep coming in and doing damage or shooting bears or doing whatever. So we said, hold on a second here, we live there, we want to make sure that we have the capacity to manage these areas. And so as the environmentalists you saw that our land use plans were almost done, and they began to move on to the next valley, which is their normal way. They wanted to move on to the boreal. You guys are done, you've done your protection. We said, no, you guys aren't getting off that easy. We need to create some capacity in the region. We need some resourcing to put people out on the land to manage these areas. We need some resourcing to create sustainable economic development. And we came up with the idea of raising a fund, and we did an analysis, took a guess at how much it would be, and then we went and raised it. And so we raised, just for that part of it alone, we have a $60 million endowment, which gives us very good money every year, enough money to hire people in every single one of our communities. And we've created a Guardian Watchman network and a stewardship office that manages forests and lands and air and everything within our region. And these are permanent jobs, they're forever. We take a certain percentage for carbon offset money, and it goes to those same crews if they need it, so if they need to buy vessels. So we're managing the area with our own money. Nobody gives us money to do that. We get it out of our own carbon offsets or we get it out of our endowment. And so we don't go to government and say, can you give us some money? Well, the government has no money. As a matter of fact, they've abandoned the region. They're not even around. So our people have kind of just taken over managing the whole thing. And we've become the experts in it. And I mean, we've got some amazing young people. They're now looking at getting into higher education because they know that they're going to have a job. Historically, our people didn't want to go to school because if they got some kind of an education, they had to go work somewhere else because there was no jobs at home. Those jobs are now there, and we've got some very smart young people that are managing the forest. They're very talented people. You've seen some of them in the pictures that have flashed up here. So,
I think we have time for one more question. And if there isn't one out there, I have one. But please, if there is one, this question comes from your last answer. And I'll make it be the last if that's all right. In all your negotiatings and everything, you have assembled a lot of scientists and experts. What metrics, if you can sort of take it down to maybe 2 or 3 different categories, what metrics have been most important to have a firm grasp of, and what metrics are least comfortable for the extractive industries?
least comfortable for what?
For the extractive industries, for people.
Well, the most important thing for coastal First Nations has been our relationships. Making sure that we do things the way our old chiefs used to do it. You know, my father, growing up, a hereditary chief, a First Nations chief, he had all kinds of friends. It was almost like the United Nations. You know, it wasn't just First Nations people. He was friends with everybody in town, the RCMP officers, and you know, the Indian agents. Everybody were friends of our family. When I got onto the coast and my father-in-law was there, my father-in-law was one of the negotiators for the law of the sea for the world. He was the head of a union in British Columbia, and he was in places like Geneva and the UN, and the one thing that really stuck out with these guys is how their relationships were. So, you know, they had ministers and prime ministers and people that would phone them. And I remember my dad had a minister show up and flew him over a road because my dad had phoned him and told him there's this bad road in our territory, you got to fix it. And so it's all this relationship stuff that we've always done.
And what about data in terms of, what do you really need to know in terms of data? What do you need to have a good handle on, and what are extractive industries most uncomfortable?
Well, extractive industries are, I mean, they're becoming somewhat obsolete in terms of the old corporatization and being totally extractive. We have got them to the point now where they have to be sustainable. So they're not the same animal that they used to be. What we need to make sure that they understand that there's a place for them. So you don't take people in a region and just extricate them and, you know, you just cause all of this disruption. But you know what's really been interesting is that in these extractive industries, there's certain people that depend on them. There's loggers, and there's what's called the truck loggers, who are the people who actually do the logging. And then you got the corporations that own it all. Well, these people down at the bottom end, they want sustainability. They want to know that what we're doing is going to create sustainability for them. If a person wants to be a logger, he will be one forever if he operates under our model. And so what we've ended up with is all these non-native people living in our region. They're on our side of the table. They support us because what we're doing is creating certainty for them in the future, while the corporation that they're working for is trying to do the opposite. So it's our relationships with our local people. And we don't lose a lot of sleep over the corporations. We know that they're going to keep on coming. But if you have local people who give the social mandate to companies to operate, whether they're native and non-native together, environmentalists, municipal mayors, and everybody else, we're all on the same page. And the corporations are basically going to just have to give in to the way we operate. They thought they could get away with doing it differently in the oil industry. They thought they were bigger than us. They don't think that anymore. So, yeah.
Art, congratulations again on the award. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.